Hold on. Before you assume my intention is to criticize marriage, let me assure you, I believe in love. However, there are situations where remaining in the marriage causes greater harm than departing ever would. Occasionally, the most courageous action for a man involves taking hold of his dignity, gathering his self-respect, and exiting decisively, reminiscent of Clint Eastwood in a classic spaghetti western. If this resonates with your experience, know that you are not isolated. Throughout this presentation, I intend to dissect 6 distinct indicators that suggest it could be necessary to sever the marital bond with your wife, regardless of whether the union has lasted 5 years or 50. Therefore, prepare yourself. This will be a candid discussion, potentially somewhat unsettling, yet I assure you the insight gained will be valuable. Also, prior to getting started, please select the subscribe option and enable notifications. Are you prepared? Let's begin. To start, I wish to clarify the significance of this topic. An unhealthy marriage does more than simply cause unhappiness. It has the potential to gradually erode the very essence of your identity. Its effects often manifest subtly initially. You find justifications. You convince yourself it's merely a difficult phase, that all marriages encounter them. You intensify your efforts. You persist longer, trusting that increased affection or greater effort will improve the situation. But over time, an inexplicable shift begins to occur within you. Your laughter isn't as frequent or genuine as it once was. You persistently doubt your own judgment. You perceive yourself as diminished, not due to personal change, but because the burden of the partnership has worn away at your core, your dignity, your self-esteem, your joy. The damage isn't confined to the marriage, it extends to you personally. And the question persistently arises, at what point did I sacrifice my own identity, attempting to salvage something irretrievably lost? I've experienced this myself. I understand the feeling of waking beside a partner, yet experiencing profound isolation. To navigate your personal space with constant caution, like treading on eggshells. To question if maybe this state, a silent anguish concealed from the world, is the new normal. And for an extended period, I rationalized, as many men might, that this is simply the nature of things. Our upbringing often conditions us to persevere, to mend, to maintain stability regardless of the personal toll. However, a crucial aspect often omitted is that not everything is reparable, and certain struggles are not intended to be perpetual. A threshold exists beyond which remaining signifies not resilience, but self-detriment. Stoic philosophy instructs us that our genuine sphere of control encompasses only our mind, our choices, our actions, our inner tranquility. We lack the power to dictate another person's behavior, or the depth of their affection for us, or their capacity for transformation. Yet we possess the agency to determine when to declare enough. We can opt to cease investing ourselves in a dynamic that solely depletes without reciprocation. As Marcus Aurelius penned, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." This was the reality I ultimately had to confront. Remaining in a union that strips away your serenity does not constitute loyalty. It represents a capitulation of your existence to another's disorder. Your purpose is not to serve as an outlet for someone else's emotional volatility. You're not meant to gradually fade away simply due to a vow taken. Commitments are inherently mutual, and if you find yourself upholding your end unilaterally, a reassessment of the partnership is warranted. Departing does not signify failure. It is prioritizing your well-being over their destructive influence. And if you have recognized that profound emptiness, that erosion of self, this realization demands more than passive contemplation. It signifies a call to action. Your future, autonomy, and tranquility await beyond the decision to release. Now comes the first indicator. She persistently disrespects you. Esteem forms the bedrock of any enduring connection. Without it, affection cannot thrive. The erosion isn't sudden. Initially, the signs are minor. Perhaps she cuts you off mid-sentence, negates your viewpoints before family, scoffs when you reveal something meaningful, and you dismiss it, rationalizing she's merely in a mood. Her intent isn't harmful. But gradually, a part of your inner self starts to diminish. You cease proposing concepts. You no longer articulate aspirations. You steer clear of specific topics, anticipating the inevitable outcome, eye-rolling, interruptions, or belittling remarks. You begin to perceive yourself as merely a visitor within your own residence. Even more unsettling, alienated from your own identity. I recall a gentleman, Richard. He wasn't ostentatious, certainly not wealthy, just an honorable fellow who dedicated his life to hard work as a mechanic. Established a modest auto shop from scratch. He earned the community's trust. Within his business, respect was afforded him. His domestic life, however, presented a stark contrast. His spouse dominated all aspects, the finances, the dialogues, the choices. She interacted with him as if he lacked intelligence, addressed him condescendingly, like a minor incapable of managing tasks correctly. Gradually, Richard's self-assurance eroded. He ceased socializing with companions. He no longer discussed his entrepreneurial ambitions. His routine became mechanical. Appear, perform his duties, return home. He once possessed a certain vitality, a sense of accomplishment in the life he had constructed. But by the time our paths crossed, he appeared as merely a shadow of his former self. He confessed somberly on one occasion, "It feels as though I've ceased to exist." This illustrates the impact of persistent disrespect on a man. It gradually diminishes your self-perception until your original identity fades. According to Stoic philosophy, while we cannot dictate another's treatment of us, our response remains within our power. However, herein lies the challenge. If your response involves remaining in surroundings marked by daily disrespect, you implicitly condition yourself to tolerate it. You're internalizing the notion that you are unworthy of superior treatment. This internalization poses a significant risk. The Stoics further emphasize our personal accountability for maintaining tranquility. As Marcus Aurelius stated, the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. Should your mental landscape be perpetually clouded by disrespect and critique, peace will remain elusive. You will exist in a state of silent suffering, persuading yourself that this is the unalterable reality of life. Yet, this is not the case, particularly for a man cognizant of his intrinsic value. Richard took action. He departed. The process was arduous, as such transitions invariably are, but gradually he constructed a new existence, one where his perspective held significance once more, where he could look into the mirror and acknowledge the reflection confronting him. This outcome exemplifies the restoration of dignity. Your sense of self reemerges. And occasionally, the most valiant course involves not remaining to suffer, but departing to reconstruct. For a man seeking respect must initially accord it to himself. 2. She employs guilt as a tool for manipulation. A distinct form of weariness arises from perpetually feeling inadequate. Irrespective of your actions, regardless of the extent of your giving, it feels like attempting to fill a bottomless pit. You invest more of your time, your vitality, your forbearance, believing that increased effort, improved affection, or greater understanding might lead to betterment. But improvement never materializes. Instead, the criteria constantly shift, the expectations fluctuate, and you discern you're engaged in an unwinnable contest. I was acquainted with a man named Thomas. He labored in construction, an individual enduring lengthy workdays, 10 or 12 hours exposed to the elements, his hands rough, his physique sore upon returning home. Nevertheless, crossing his own threshold brought no solace. His wife would accuse him of prioritizing work over their family life. If fatigue necessitated rest, he was labeled selfish. If he sought solitude to regain composure, he was deemed cold and withdrawn. And when he attempted to articulate his situation, to convey the intensity of his efforts to support their household, she would twist his explanations against him. She'd recount every past error, every disagreement they'd ever encountered, as if reciting from a detailed record. Forgiveness was absent, progress impossible. Only constant reminders of his insufficiency remained. Thomas presumed that clearer explanations, or more diligent efforts to embody the husband she desired, might alter the circumstances. But nothing changed. This is the nature of emotional manipulation. It begins subtly, a stray remark here, an expressive sigh there, but soon solidifies into a recurring pattern. You begin to question your own emotions, to doubt your personal needs. You start feeling culpable for desiring basic necessities like repose, tranquility, or moments for reflection. You cease relying on your own intuition, and that is the point at which control is seized. Because the individual who governs your emotions effectively governs your life. The Stoics teach that while we cannot control others' actions, we maintain control over our reactions. Marcus Aurelius noted, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." However, if you are permitting someone to coerce you into submission daily through guilt, if you remain passive while they distort your feelings and sow self-doubt, you have relinquished that authority. You have ceded control of your mind. And a man who loses command of his mind to another's influence ultimately loses himself. Thomas eventually arrived at his limit. He recognized he was functioning like a marionette, maneuvered by guilt and apprehension. Remaining did not demonstrate strength. It demonstrated weakness by allowing the situation to persist. Thus he opted to leave. It was not straightforward. He experienced nights filled with self-doubt, questioning the correctness of his decision. But progressively, he felt his thoughts clarify. His sense of identity resurfaced. He was no longer navigating carefully around potential conflicts. He was standing firmly on his own ground. Manipulation is not synonymous with love. It is about control, and no man is destined to exist under another's constraint. If you find yourself in a marriage where guilt serves as the binding force, the time has come to break free. The Stoics urge us, safeguard your mind. Protect it as if your very existence hinges upon it, because in numerous respects it does. 3. There is an absolute lack of emotional support. A marriage should ideally function as a sanctuary, a haven where one can discard external defenses and find respite. Life itself presents sufficient challenges. You engage in struggles out in the world, professional demands, monetary pressures, bereavement, health issues. You return home after the day's end seeking calm, connection, someone capable of understanding without extensive explanation. Yet for some men, home offers no sanctuary. It represents merely another arena of conflict, and at times the silence can be more piercing than any overt dispute. A particular type of loneliness stems from experiencing marriage devoid of emotional intimacy. Its presence is felt most acutely when life's burdens become heavy. You bear sorrow, anxiety, fatigue, and the individual who once pledged partnership feels remote, uninterested. It isn't the lack of spoken words that inflicts the deepest wound. It's the absence of genuine concern. You seek support only to encounter cold detachment. Perhaps she is physically present, occupying the same space, yet emotionally she is absent. You attempt to communicate your struggles, only to be met with indifference or worse, annoyance, as though your suffering is an imposition. And during these instances, you grasp a truth long denied. You are navigating this alone. Confronting this realization is difficult. Experiencing solitude in life is one matter. Experiencing it within a marriage is profoundly different. You begin to self-interrogate. Perhaps your expectations are excessive. Perhaps greater fortitude is required. Stoic philosophy encourages enduring adversity with dignity, cultivating self-reliance amid suffering. However, it does not advocate tolerating a partner who exacerbates that suffering. Stoicism focuses on fortifying the mind, not calcifying the heart to the point where emotional neglect becomes acceptable. When a marriage devolves into an emotionally sterile environment, it corrodes something essential within a man. You cease pursuing connection because the pain of rejection becomes too acute. You suppress your emotions so profoundly that feeling itself becomes a forgotten experience. The partnership becomes perfunctory, a sequence of actions devoid of substance. You might cohabitate, but you are not truly sharing a life. And progressively, this void begins to define you. It diminishes your perception of self-worth. Because if the person who committed to supporting you through all circumstances cannot extend even a minimal measure of compassion, you begin to question your own deservingness of any. But you are deserving. Every man is. Stoicism reminds us that although strength is necessary, we remain human. We require connection. We require warmth. We need someone who will metaphorically sit beside us in darkness, not someone who dismisses the darkness as reality. If you find yourself within a marriage characterized by a lack of empathy, shared sorrow, or emotional backing, it's imperative to pose a challenging question. Are you clinging to a marriage, or merely to a contractual arrangement with someone who has already abandoned you emotionally? Departing isn't a sign of weakness. It's choosing to cease existing like an apparition in your own life. Stoicism doesn't demand needless suffering. It demands taking ownership of our own peace. And occasionally that necessitates severing ties. Not motivated by anger, but by self-respect. Because an existence lived in emotional desolation is not a fulfilling life. It's a life partially lived, and you merit more. If you found these insights valuable, let me know by commenting yes below. Your thoughts matter, and I'd love to hear from you. 4. She undermines your personal development. A distinct type of anguish arises from the discovery that the individual who ought to be your foremost champion is, instead, subtly impeding your progress. You initiate steps towards self-improvement. You strive to enhance your capabilities, to evolve, to transcend your past self. Yet rather than receiving encouragement, you encounter opposition. Initially subtle, almost easily disregarded, a dismissive remark upon sharing your ambitions, a sarcastic quip when you dedicate yourself to a new endeavor, a lack of warmth when you achieve a milestone. Gradually, the pattern becomes undeniable. Each attempt at advancement is met with efforts to pull you back. What renders this particularly detrimental is its frequent obscurity. It isn't a conflict waged openly. It's a gradual wearing down of your self-assurance and drive. You enroll in a program to broaden your expertise, and she questions the utility of your time investment. You begin prioritizing your physical well-being, and she subtly encourages reversion to old habits, dismissing it lightly. You attain a hard-earned success, and instead of observing pride reflected in her gaze, you perceive apathy, or worse, her own insecurity. What you start to comprehend is that your personal evolution poses a threat to her feeling of control. She harbors apprehension about the person you are becoming, as it serves as a reminder of the person she resists becoming herself. Consequently, rather than supporting your journey, she endeavors to keep you stationary. Stoic philosophy offers clear guidance on this matter. A man's journey should represent continuous betterment. Epictetus instructed that one must first determine the kind of person they aspire to be, and subsequently undertake the necessary actions to realize that aspiration. However, if you are bound to someone who opposes that vision, your energy is dissipated in a conflict that should never be necessary. You become trapped in a repetitive pattern of attempting to reconcile your own advancement with managing her unease. This does not constitute partnership. It is sabotage veiled as affection. A marriage is intended as an alliance, not a rivalry. If she perceives your self-improvement as a menace rather than a mutual triumph, you are not participating in a healthy relationship. You are situated in circumstances where your potential is curtailed each time you begin to flourish. The Stoic does not plead for change. He does not endeavor to compel growth in anyone unwilling. He concentrates on his own trajectory and defends it resolutely. Occasionally, the most courageous act of personal growth involves releasing that which restricts you. If your marriage confines you, it ceases to be love, it becomes fear. And no man should navigate his existence burdened by fear masquerading as loyalty. Growth necessitates freedom, and freedom frequently necessitates letting go. 5. You exist in apprehension, not tranquility. I once conversed with a man who characterized his marriage as akin to a conflict zone, not marked by physical violence or loud altercations, but by a palpable tension that permeated every aspect of his day. He revealed that he found himself constantly strategizing his words, what to utter, the timing, the delivery, solely to prevent inciting another emotional outburst from his wife. It wasn't a lack of love for her. He had loved her once. But over time, affection had morphed into fear. Fear of disagreement, fear of disapproval, fear of becoming the focus of her volatile temperament. Consequently, he ceased expressing himself openly. He stopped being authentic. He retreated within the confines of his own residence, believing that protracted silence might perhaps maintain calm. Yet tranquility remained elusive. He convinced himself he was preserving harmony. What he failed to grasp was that his silence did not represent peace at all. It signified capitulation. Marriage is not intended as a battleground where one must navigate emotional hazards, uncertain when a misstep might trigger the next detonation. A man should never experience fear within his own home. When you find yourself treading carefully, censoring every utterance and thought due to fear of her reaction, that isn't love, it's fear. And fear corrodes a man's spirit more subtly, yet just as inevitably, as any overt conflict. The Stoics teach that genuine peace originates internally, from mastering one's own mind and refusing to be governed by the actions or emotions of others. Marcus Aurelius spoke of the profound serenity achieved when focusing solely on our own behavior, disregarding the conduct of others. However, this teaching carries a responsibility. If a man remains in an environment where his peace is perpetually threatened, where his days are consumed anticipating the next assault, he is not practicing Stoic endurance. He is neglecting his obligation to protect his own inner self. Emotional security is not an optional luxury in marriage. It is the essential groundwork. If your wife transforms into a source of anxiety rather than a collaborator in peace, you are residing within a prison, not a partnership. And the longer you remain silent, the more of yourself you forfeit. Silence amidst constant fear does not equate to strength. It equates to a slow spiritual demise. The Stoic man understands his inability to control his wife's emotions or actions, but he retains control over his own positioning. He controls the decision of when to withdraw. And if your marriage has evolved into a space where you no longer feel secure to speak, to think, to exist authentically, it is time to prioritize yourself. Because peace is not discovered through silence. It is forged by removing oneself from the forces that destroy it. 6. She repeatedly violates your trust. I once knew a man named Michael. Externally, he appeared to have life well managed, a stable career, 2 children, a home he had strived his entire life to acquire. Yet, if one spent enough time with him, his eyes conveyed a different narrative. They carried the burden of a man who had endured deceit more times than he could recall. His wife, Lauren, had been unfaithful not just once, but on 3 separate occasions. Initially, it involved messages she dismissed as innocuous. Subsequently, an affair she vowed would never recur. The 3rd instance, she didn't even attempt denial. And yet Michael remained. He rationalized that he was staying for the sake of the family, that forgiveness represented nobility, that errors are human, and that perhaps sufficient love from his end might eventually deter her from causing further pain. However, with each act of forgiveness, the promises diminished in value. The apologies became increasingly superficial. It wasn't merely the infidelities that fractured him. It was her capacity to look him directly in the eye and lie without flinching, confident in his eventual forgiveness. Over time, Michael didn't only lose faith in her, he lost faith in himself. He began questioning his own value as a man, as a husband, as someone deserving of fidelity. Trust constitutes the entirety of a marriage. In its absence, what lingers is merely the empty form of something formerly vibrant. You can attempt to fill this void with patience. You can endeavor to hold it together with hope. But when trust is fractured repeatedly, it ceases to be accidental. It becomes a conscious choice. A choice made by someone who interprets your forgiveness not as an act of grace, but as tacit permission to continue transgressing boundaries. And the longer you tolerate it, the more you reinforce the message to yourself that this is the extent of your worth. The Stoics were explicit regarding this. Forgiveness possesses strength, but only when coupled with wisdom. Seneca stated, "It is the power of the mind to be unconquerable." Yet Michael was not unconquerable. He existed in a state of surrender, quietly relinquishing his dignity with each successive betrayal. A Stoic does not remain where his peace is perpetually under siege. He does not mistake endurance for self-annihilation. If trust within your marriage has become a cyclical pattern of betrayal and insincere apologies, you face a decision, one born not of anger, but of clarity. You can opt to persist in a cycle that breaks you, or you can choose to step away and reclaim your strength. Michael eventually made that choice. It required years, but upon finally leaving, he remarked it was the first time in a considerable period he could face his reflection with respect. You are entitled to loyalty. You are entitled to honesty. And sometimes the sole path to finding these is to withdraw from where they are demonstrably absent. Now, let's explore the more profound significance here. Severing connections does not equate to failure. It signifies the moment a man elects to cease enduring quiet suffering and commences the process of taking back control of his existence. I have observed numerous men fall into the belief that departing from a fractured marriage signifies capitulation, that leaving implies diminished strength, loyalty, or honor. But the reality is, there exists no inherent nobility in remaining within a situation that depletes your vitality. A place where self-respect is systematically eroded, where tranquility feels like a forgotten state. The Stoics do not advocate for martyrdom. They never asserted that righteousness involves permitting oneself to be gradually annihilated by another's neglect or cruelty. They taught us to conduct our lives with lucidity, moral integrity, and self-respect. And occasionally such lucidity directs one toward a straightforward, irrefutable realization. This must end. I have encountered men who lingered excessively due to fear, apprehensive about societal judgment, fearful of solitude, concerned about abandoning the effort prematurely. However, your existence is not a spectacle staged for an audience. It isn't about conforming to external standards. It represents your singular, fleeting opportunity to live authentically. And if the truth dictates that your union has transformed into a source of anguish, rather than solace, departing is not a sign of frailty. It is an act of prudence. The Stoics underscore that our foremost duty lies towards ourselves, to foster an existence characterized by meaning and ethical conduct. This cannot be achieved if you are shackled to a dynamic that inflicts damage upon you. Departing is not fueled by rage. It stems from clear perception. It involves ceasing to anticipate a transformation that is unlikely to occur, and instead prioritizing your own well-being, allowing yourself space to recover and reconstruct your inner calm, because this is a task only you can undertake, requiring no external validation. What is required is fortitude. So if you found yourself resonating with these indicators, perhaps experiencing a slight release of that internal tension, interpret this as your cue. Sometimes the most potent action a man can take is not persevering, but releasing. To depart, preserving your self-respect, maintaining your composure with tranquility finally attainable. Existence is too fleeting to spend it feeling alienated within your own residence. You deserve better than being confined within a non-reciprocal union that exhausts you. And remember, severing the bond isn't surrender, it's self-affirmation. It's creating room for the evolution into the man you are destined to be. Should this communication resonate deeply, don't let the impulse fade. Select the subscribe option and enable notifications, because we are cultivating something genuine here. Fortitude, lucidity, and a touch of levity to navigate the difficult aspects. Post a comment, relate your experience. Alternatively, simply